5. When the night crept down in shadowy blue and silver, they threaded the shimmering channel in the rowboat and, tying it to a jutting rock, began climbing the cliff together. The first shelf was 10 feet up, wide and furnishing a natural diving platform. There they sat down in the bright moonlight and watched the faint, incessant surge of the waters, almost stilled now as the tide set seaward. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. She nodded. Always happy near the sea. You know," she went on, "I've been thinking all day that you and I are somewhat alike. We're both rebels, only for different reasons. 2 years ago, when I was just 18 and you were 25, well, we were both conventional successes. I was an utterly devastating debutante, and you were a prosperous musician, just commissioned in the army. Gentleman by the act of Congress," he put in ironically. "Well, at any rate, we were both fitted. If our corners were not rubbed off, they were at least pulled in. But deep in us both was something that made us require more for happiness. I don't know what I wanted. I went from man to man, restless, impatient, month by month getting less acquiescent and more dissatisfied. I used to sit sometimes chewing at the insides of my mouth and thinking I was going crazy. I had a frightful sense of transiency. I wanted things now. Now! Where was I? Here I was, beautiful. I am, aren't I?" "Yes," agreed Carlyle tentatively. Ardita rose suddenly. "Wait a second. I want to try this delightful-looking sea." She walked to the end of the ledge and shot out over the sea, doubling up in mid-air and then straightening out and entering to water straight as a blade in the perfect jackknife dive. In a minute her voice floated up to him. "You see, I used to read all day and most of the night. I began to resent society." "Come on up here," he interrupted. "What on earth are you doing?" "Just floating round on my back. I'll be up in a minute. Let me tell you, the only thing I enjoyed was shocking people, wearing something quite impossibly and quite charmingly to a fancy dress party, going round with the fastest men in New York, and getting into some of the most hellish scrapes imaginable." The sounds of splashing mingled with her words, and then he heard her hurried breathing as she began climbing up to the side, upside to the ledge. "Go on in," she called. Obediently he rose and dived. When he emerged, dripping, and made the climb, he found that she was no longer on the ledge, but after a second frightening, he heard her light laughter from another shelf 10 feet up. There he joined her, and they both sat quietly for a moment, their arms clasped round their knees, panting a little from the climb. "The family were wild," she said suddenly. "They tried to marry me off. And then when I begun to feel that after all life was scarcely worth living, I found something." Her eyes went skyward exultantly. "I found something." Carlyle waited, and her words came with a rush. "Courage, just that. Courage is a rule of life, and something to cling to always. I began to build up this enormous faith in myself. I began to see that in all my idols in the past, some manifestation of courage had unconsciously been the thing that attracted me. I began separating courage from the other things of life, all sorts of courage, the beaten, bloody prize fighter, coming up for more. I used to make men take me to prize fights, the déclassé women sailing through a nest of cats and looking at them as if they were mud under her feet, the liking what you like always, the utter disregard for other people's opinions, just to live as I liked always and to die in my own way. Did you bring up the cigarettes?" He handed over one and held a match for her gently. "Still," Ardita continued, "the men kept gathering, old men and young men, my mental and physical inferiors, most of them, but all intensely desiring to have me, to own this rather magnificently proud tradition I built round me. Do you see? Sort of. You never were beaten, and you never apologized." "Never!" She sprang to the edge, poised for a moment like a crucified figure against the sky, then, describing a dark parabola, plunked without a splash between two silver ripples 25 feet below. Her voice floated up to him again. "And courage to me, meant plowing through the dull gray mist that comes down on life, not only overriding people and circumstances, but overriding the bleakness of living, a sort of insistence on the value of life and the worth of transient things. She was climbing up now, and at her last words her head, with the damp yellow hair slicked symmetrically back, appeared on his level. "All very well," objected Carlyle. "You can call it courage, but your courage is really built, after all, on a pride of birth. You were bred to that defiant attitude. On my gray days, even courage is one of the things that's gray and lifeless." She was sitting near the edge, hugging her knees and gazing abstractedly at the white moon. He was farther back, crammed like a grotesque god into a niche in the rock. "I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna," she began, "but you haven't grasped me yet. My courage is faith, faith in the eternal resilience of me. That joy'll come back, and hope, and spontaneity, and I feel that till it does I've got to keep my lips shut and my chin high and my eyes wide, not necessarily any silly smiling. Oh, I've been through hell without a whine quite often, and the female hell is deadlier than the male." "But supposing," suggested Carlyle, "that before joy and hope and all that came back the curtain was drawn on you for good." Ardita rose, and going to the wall, climbed with some difficulty to the next ledge, another 10 or 15 above. "Why?" she called back. "Then I'd have won." He edged out till he could see her. "Better not dive from there. You'll break your back," he said quickly. She laughed. "Not I." Slowly she spread her arms and stood there swan-like, radiating a pride in her young perfection that lit a warm glow in Carlyle's heart. "We're going through the black air with our arms wide and our feet straight out behind like a dolphin's tail, and we're going to think we'll never hit the silver down till suddenly it'll be all warm around us and full of little kissing, caressing waves." Then she was in the air, and Carlyle involuntarily held his breath. He had not realized that the dive was nearly 40 feet. It seemed an eternity before he heard the swift, compact sound as she reached the sea. And it was with his glad sigh of relief that when her light, watery laughter curled up the sides of the cliff and into his anxious ears that he knew he loved her.